So dry aging is just allowing that carcass itself to remain in refrigeration for an extended period of time to allow the natural enzymes in the meat to make it more tender. But then also, because it doesn't have a covering on and it's exposed to the environment in the refrigeration, it's causing some evaporation to occur. That evaporation helps to concentrate flavors that are already there. On top of that, it might sound a little funny, but sometimes native molds will start to develop on those cuts of meat that we've allowed for dry aging to occur. And that's not a bad thing. We know that those molds are safe, but we also don't know much about what they're doing as far as the final product is concerned.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vandal Theory, a podcast about science and research at University of Idaho. My name is Lee Cooper, and I will be your host for the day. I'm a science writer and editor here at University of Idaho. And I am joined, as usual, by my co-host, Danae. How are you doing today, Danae?
I'm doing great. I'm Danae Lenz. I am the External Communications Coordinator for U of I.
So today, we are going to talk about beef. And the question to kick us off, Danae, have you ever done any butchering of animals before? Such as maybe while hunting or at a ranch or a farm or something like that?
So I haven't personally. However, my brother is very big into hunting, and I have definitely walked into his garage with her being a deer or an elk or something hanging from the rafters. And it's definitely an interesting experience. Like, the feeling in my stomach is definitely odd, let's say. But yeah, that's all my experience with it.
Roughly the same here. I think the closest I've gotten is like carving a Thanksgiving turkey, which really isn't the same thing. But yeah, watching people after hunting, like dress down a deer or something. Mm-hmm. And it's intriguing and it feels a little gross, but maybe not, because it's like, oh, well, I'm going to eat that. And yeah, it's interesting to watch.
Yeah. I think it definitely highlights our sort of disconnect between, because I eat meat. I love eating meat. But there's something about seeing it just hanging there that there's some cognitive dissonance involved there, let's say.
I would absolutely agree. Not something that the average grocery purchaser of a steak probably thinks about when they're purchasing Saturday dinner or something. All right, we are going to meet Phil Bass, who is an associate professor of meat science in the Department of Animal, Veterinary and Food Sciences at University of Idaho. Whether it's hamburger, filet mignon, ribeye, or T-bone, beef is a staple on many American dinner tables. And we're going to take a listen as Bass discusses the growing size of cattle, the creation of dry-aged beef, and the impact of the meat industry on our economy. So today, ready to go?
I'm excited to meet him.
Well, Phil, welcome to the podcast today. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on here, and we get to talk about something quite interesting.
Yes.
Can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, so I'm Phil Bass. I'm meat science faculty in the Animal Veterinary and Food Science Department. Been here for just over 7 years, and I teach introductory animal science class and a animal products class, which is meat science and a little bit of dairy products.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So what drew you to beef?
Yeah.
You specialize in beef.
Yes. Yeah.
How'd you get there?
Yeah. So as a meat scientist, I mean, I can talk about all the other animals, but yeah, my main focus is definitely in beef. And that works really well for the state of Idaho, because Idaho, we have more cattle than people, and beef production is a big part of the state. I grew up raising livestock, and we harvested our own animals, cut our own meat, and beef was always a big focus of that. And with some of the research that I did during my graduate school time, it was beef focused. And then prior to my time here at University of Idaho, I worked for a beef company for 8.5 years. So certified Angus beef out in Ohio. Yeah.
So obviously humans have been butchering meat for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah. As soon as we could sharpen a rock. Yeah.
Right. So obviously we've done this for a while.
Yeah.
So what are the meat sciences? This is a science that people study and research. And I mean, it's as real a science as chemistry and biology and everything. So what is it? What is meat sciences?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's been around for a long time, maybe not specifically called out as meat science, but in some respects, very little has changed since 10,000 years ago and somebody sharpened a piece of steel to cut up some meat. But in many other ways, we have just become more advanced in making meat taste better and making it very, very safe. And so that's what the meat sciences really is. It's an avenue within the animal sciences or in food science, depending on the institution you're with, but that we're kind of a jack of all trades. We have to understand how the animals are raised, everything that goes into even the genetics of these animals, how that's going to impact the growth and eventually the final product, the meat product itself. We have to think about the nutrition that goes into these animals. I mean, that's what makes them grow eventually. And animal handling is a big part of meat sciences and understanding the behavior of animals so that we can take better care of them all the way up to that final point of their life because it's right for the animal, but then it also makes better meat. As far as meat science is concerned, it's a very, very broad subject, honestly, because of the food safety and the food quality part of things. From the food safety side, meat processing and meat science has kind of helped to lead the safe, robust food supply that we have in the United States. And ever since 1906, we have had a federal regulation for how we process meat in this country. And it continues to grow on that. But we have a very, very safe food supply as a result of a lot of the efforts of the meat sciences. You know, a lot of people say, I didn't even know meat science was a thing. And it's like, yeah, actually, it turns out we're here. We're real. We have our own association and everything. I'm on the board of directors. And it's a growing association, in fact, the American Meat Science Association. We have our own journal and meat and muscle biology. It's people who have expertise in a variety of different areas from, again, the animal welfare and animal handling perspective, from thermodynamics and just being able to chill that live animal once it's harvested into the chilled meat that we have. We have further processing. So you think about sausages. A lot of people talk about, I want less processed meats and things like that. And that's fine, or less processed foods. And that's a great thing. But we also have to remember that humanity has been around because we figure out better ways of preservation. And sausages is a great example where it's a processed food. The processing really is just grinding and adding salt, but it's still an added ingredient.
Yeah,
but that's all
sure.
that's all part of meat science, is just how do the different ingredients that we put into different things, hams, bacons, things like that, how does that affect the final product, the safety of the product? And in many cases, it was something that was done to preserve. Now we're just learning about why it is so effective and why it works so well. And so that's the meat sciences in a nutshell.
Cool. So we're going to talk about what turns out to be quite a few different aspects of the meat industry today.
Yeah.
And the first one kind of goes along with, there's that kind of semi-silly adage that bigger is always better.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to talk to you about how cows have actually gotten bigger.
Yeah.
And is that better or just different?
Right.
What are the complications there?
Yeah, I like the way that you framed that because, yes, it's different. And in many ways, it definitely is better. We're getting more meat per animal because they have become larger.
And how much larger
How much
are we
larger?
talking?
Yeah. So to give folks perspective, in the 1960s, beef cattle were finishing around 1,000 pounds live weight. And now we're looking at animals that are 1,600 pounds.
Oh, gosh.
So they've increased by over 50%. And that's okay, because what we also focus on as we're raising livestock and in making improvements is that we have to make sure they have good structure and can carry themselves. And these animals are far more efficient than they've ever been. And so we can harvest them at a younger age, meaning we're not putting nearly as many resources into them. They don't need as much feed. At the same time, cattle and all ruminant animals where, goats and sheep and elk and deer and all these other animals, they're magical creatures. They turn grass into things that we can eat and use. Yeah, anyway, cattle have changed a lot over time. We add about 5 pounds of carcass weight to the beef carcass each year, and that's on a linear scale. Yeah, it's pretty incredible what the industry has been able to do. A lot of folks think that has to do with emerging technologies or things like that. No, it's not. It's just selective breeding. We're getting really good at and managing the animal. So we continue to make improvements there. So it's a good thing from an efficiency standpoint. The challenges that come along with that is that we still have to process these animals into meat, okay? And so that means they have to go through some type of inspected meat plant, and those packing houses haven't changed a lot in size over the years. And so now we have a much larger animal, yet, the rail heights and the areas where we hang the carcasses, that doesn't change much. On top of that, we have to chill this carcass from a live body temperature of about 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit on average down to less than 40 degrees in a short period of time. And because they're becoming bigger and bigger, we need to really focus on how do we improve that process, because it's becoming a larger mass that we're trying to chill. And so that's some of the research that we've been doing, is to help the farmers and ranchers continue to provide safe, high quality meat, but also maintaining that safety and freshness of the product by being able to chill that big carcass down. And so we look at very practical ways in our research team to make improvements, and sometimes it's just using a knife in a different way.
So what do you mean by that?
If we look at the beef carcass, there's the big hind leg that we suspend the carcass from, and that's the largest quantity of mass that we have to chill. And so what we've been looking at are different ways of maybe opening that up, seaming the muscles apart. Seam butchery is what it's called, to open that up and allow for more air to exchange, cold air to exchange that heat. Extremely practical. We're not basic scientists. We're not molecular. We are very much in the macro sense. But what our research is doing is that it can easily transfer directly into the industry, which is something that we want to do.
Does that mean we actually get maybe some more of the best steaks or different steaks?
Yeah, I mean, we have about 3 hours to cover that, right? So no, I'm kidding. In short, what it's doing, it is making us think about steaks and roasts in a little bit different way. We can still make a lot of the traditional steaks and roasts, but as a result of the larger animal, now we can actually do that a little bit differently and produce almost a different type of steak. And because we're making adjustments to that carcass early on in the process, now we're able to make steaks that are more consumer friendly. Sometimes you look at round steaks, a London broil, for example, and they're just so massive, they'll cover the whole entire plate. Well, what if we just cut that a little bit differently into a smaller portion that's more desirable, and it's probably going to be more consistent as a result of the intervention that we posed in the initial chilling process.
Sounds good to me, because I can only eat so
many
ounces to begin with.
Yeah, well, and in the past, it used to be that the London broil could feed that family of 7, and that's not the case of the common consumer anymore. And so we need packages and final products, final cuts that can feed the family of 3, or maybe just the individual person, and that's what we're thinking about in the meat sciences.
Cool. Okay, let's go in a totally different direction.
Cool, let's do it.
So you've been looking at dry aging beef.
Sure.
And before we dive into your research project around that, can we define that?
Yes. Dry aging is more of an artisanal culinary method of changing the overall meat eating experience by just it's actually taking a step back in time. Dry aging is exactly what was done well into, ever since like the 1920s to the 1970s, prior to full adoption of vacuum packaging, which is what most meat goes into before it's displayed in a grocery case. Okay, so dry aging is just allowing that carcass itself to remain in refrigeration for an extended period of time to allow the natural enzymes in the meat to make it more tender, but then also, because it doesn't have a covering on and it's exposed to the environment in the refrigeration, it's causing some evaporation to occur. That evaporation helps to concentrate flavors that are already there. On top of that, it might sound a little funny, but sometimes native molds will start to develop on those cuts of meat that we've allowed for dry aging to occur. And that's not a bad thing. We know that those molds are safe, but we also don't know much about what they're doing as far as the final product is concerned. My experience in the industry side of things is dry aging is very widely accepted in large metropolitan areas, New York City, San Francisco, LA, Houston, but it's not very consistent. But it's very unique. It's a unique flavor, and it's something to actually be appreciated, kind of like unique flavors from different cheeses from different regions that have their own unique flavors to them because of the environment that they're being cured in.
Wines, all that kind of stuff. They're going to take on the flavors of the region, whether that's the soil or all that kind of good stuff.
Exactly. In the wine industry, there's a term called terroir, it's exactly what you're saying. You can take the same variety of grape, put it in a different environment, different climate, different soil content, different moisture content, and it's going to produce something different. It's the same variety of grape, but now it tastes different in those different areas. And so similar hypothesis to what we had with dry aging of meats, we focused on beef, of course, and how maybe the unique microflora that's just in the air, we're interacting with it every day, is it bringing about its unique flavors as a result?
All right. So what did you do and what did you find?
Yeah, so we took the opportunity to work with some of our industry partners that are all across the United States. And we gathered beef strip loins, so the New York strip, whole subprimes, whole cuts. We shipped them out to those unique locations. We had them measure their humidity, their temperature, their airflow in their coolers. But then we also just asked them to dry age for us, and no inoculation or anything. It's just whatever is native in that environment that's going to interact with the meat. Those products were then sent back here to Vandal Brand Meats, and we cut it up. We did a variety of different analyses. We did microflora population analysis to see who's
living here?
Who's the little creatures that are inhabiting the meat. What we found was that there is absolutely unique fingerprints of microbial communities that are living on the surfaces of these meats. Overwhelmingly, it's going to be different varieties of molds. And those molds, again, they're safe. In fact, there's one that keeps showing up. It's Penicillium roquefortii. That's Roquefort cheese mold.
Oh,
and
okay.
So, yeah, it's blue cheese mold that's on there. Well, in fact, dry aging, sometimes you do notice kind of a cheesiness to that. It's a very, very unique, robust flavor. The processor's kind of more in the very humid, closer to maritime climate. So say San Francisco or New York City, very close to the ocean. Those definitely have a bit more of a cheesiness to the flavors versus say a more oaky, nutty flavor that came from a drier environment in Denver. And it's just really cool to see the different microorganisms that are there. There's a lot more that we can look into to see who's doing what. The hard part is to duplicate those communities because they like what they like, and they're very hard to replicate in an alternative environment. And so I guess it's kind of the fun of food, and it's something to embrace rather than try to control, I guess.
Yeah, well, you're not going to be able to force grapes in California to taste like they're from Italy. It's just not going to happen.
Exactly.
You can't replicate that.
Exactly, yeah. But it's something to embrace.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about this is that now with some of the incredible logistics that we have out there for food transportation, I proposed to some of our private entities, well, why don't we sell dry-aged beef in the same way we would sell wine? What are you feeling like tonight? Are you feeling oaky? Are you feeling cheesy? I always feel cheesy, but and how can we meet that expectation and match it to the diner? Isn't that cool?
That sounds amazing. Sounds like your team is suffering through having to taste these all.
We had to taste so much of it. Oh, darn.
All right. So going in another direction even, one of the things that you have focused on a bunch is kind of the economics of the meat business.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's the bread and butter of this per se, the actual selling of the meat.
Yes, the product itself.
And the product itself. But you looked more expansive than that. So what are some of the things that maybe we don't think about in terms of the economics of the meat industry?
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to write an invited paper for a journal called Animal Frontiers, and it is one that's more targeted to a less scientific focused community and more for everybody else. Okay. And, but the focus was on how does animal agriculture, meat science in our particular case, how does that impact society beyond just the nutritive value that meat brings? And it is a great nutritive food, but what more can it bring? And so I looked at 3 different areas. And first, I have to qualify, I'm not an economist by any means, but I did kind of some hammer and chisel napkin math. But it's all math that's readily available through USDA's databases and everything. And so I looked at transportation of just the live animal to the harvest facility, the slaughter facility. I looked at the actual impact of the meat world on all kinds of other industries that are feeding into to keep the meat business in business. And then also, how does meat impact the restaurants? Okay, so 3 main big areas where the meat industry is impacted. All right, so first thing to just grasp is that we have to transport these animals to these harvest facilities, and there's a lot that goes into that. We harvested about 9 billion animals in this country last year. About 8 billion of those were chickens, but the remainder are the beef and the pigs and the sheep. And so we looked at these different areas. But what I was focusing on with the transportation side is that how does that impact the greater economy? We transport these animals in tractor trailers. So we have to think about what all goes into that. And I like to show a picture. I give this presentation regularly. And I like to show a picture of a tractor trailer and say, what do you see there? I always like to point out, well, we're impacting the rubber and tire industry in Akron, Ohio. Goodyear tires are being made there. We're impacting the steel mills in Pennsylvania and the aluminum industry because a lot of those trailers are built out of aluminum for weight purposes. The fuel that it takes to keep these things in business. So we got oil rig operators down in Texas being employed as a result. Just logistics and communications, all that is involved in just keeping these trucks on the road and keeping food going. And any of this could be applied to any industry. It's just that I just wanted to focus on what are some of the numbers that are applied to the meat industry. And so that was the transportation side. Then we get into the packing house. Then we start looking at, again, stainless steel is a big part of food processing because it's easy to clean, it doesn't rust, it lasts a long time. And so anybody who is in engineering, mechanical engineering, now they're being impacted by helping to build these plants and maintain them. And the tradesmen, the welders, the electricians, the plumbers, oh my goodness, the amount of plumbing that goes into these facilities. And then on top of that, just the garb that is worn by the employees who are doing the actual meat cutting. That's cotton. And so now we're employing people in Georgia and Mississippi and Louisiana who are cotton farmers, who are producing for the linens that are being used for all of this. Even down to, we have our loggers in Idaho who are probably producing pulp that's going to go into paper products such as corrugated. So the cardboard that the meat is eventually going to go into the boxes and things like that. And so many different avenues. And then finally into the restaurant industry, I looked at how does meat on a menu play into the business. It's very, very clear that if a restaurant can sell a meat item, they're going to have more take-home dollars. It may be a more expensive item on the menu, but because of the percentage of food costs, they take home more dollars at the end of the day if they sell that meat item. And then on top of that, if the wait staff, for anybody who has ever waited tables, the reality is the big take home is the tips. And so if you can have a higher receipt ring total, then that percentage that is usually calculated for the tip is going to lead to a higher take home tip. And so it's good for everybody.
Well, before I let you go, I definitely just, for my recipe book, need to know, what is your favorite cut of beef and why?
Yeah, absolutely love the ribeye steak. It's super classic. It's the thing that everybody seems to want to enjoy during the holidays, prime rib and such. But a ribeye steak, it's very versatile. I like to just grill it, salt, pepper, meat plus fire. It's as simple as that. Ribeyes have a lot of fat in them too, and I just really enjoy the fat flavor.
You forgot the Tabasco.
No Tabasco, no Tabasco, no Tabasco, no microwaves get near my ribeye steaks. No, they're pretty darn good on their own.
All right, so we're coming to the end here. Any final thoughts?
Sure, yeah. Anybody who's interested in more of food processing in general, come visit with us because Animal Veterinary and Food Sciences Department is here to serve in that regard. Especially from the meats world, we love giving tours at Vandal Brand Meats. We love showing off our facility and our personnel and our people. That's really what it is. The students, the graduate students, the faculty who are all involved. We also are ones that really like to tell our story, and we're trying to get the story out there because more and more people we realize are separated from where their food comes from. And I'm grateful I grew up kind of in a farming ranching community. I grew up cutting meat from a very young age. I knew where my food came from. And I took that for granted for a very long time. Some things spurred my drive to eventually want to really tell that story. And regularly I'm out giving talks to groups, and it could be folks in agriculture and just talking about how their animals are processed into the great food that we have available to us. But many times also it could be people who are separated from food. And I realize that you're not going to tell the story, especially of meat processing or beef production, the world I live, in a short time. And so I finally wrote a book Eventually everybody has to do it, I guess. And it's not a coloring book and it's not a pop-up, but it's not a hard read either. But it's a book called It's Not a Cow, and it's playing off of kind of a little bit of a joke where most people who see a four-legged creature that moos, they just call them all cows. Well, that's not the truth, right? We have bulls, we have cows, we have heifers, we have steers, and the magic that is that animal. Like I said, they can turn grass and things that we can't eat into something that's not only we can eat, but it's super nutritious and very delicious. And so check that out if you have more interest. Stop by my office and I'd love to talk more about it.
All right, sounds good. Just before you go, I wanted to say one last thing. You mentioned Vandal Brand Meats.
Yes.
What is that?
Yeah, Vandal Brand Meats is our USDA-inspected meat processing facility here on campus. The current facility that we're using is a 1960s model, and so nothing wrong with the 1960s, but the reality is that building is definitely coming towards the end of its time. So now we're building a brand new one, Vandal Brand Meats. It's going to be right out on Perimeter Drive, right across from the Kibbe Dome. But Vandal Brand Meats, we are the inspected meat processing facility. We harvest a number of the different animals that are on campus, our livestock that are on campus. Cattle, sheep, we do bring in pigs, so we do have pork there. It's available for the public to purchase every Thursday and Friday from 12 to 5:30. Go in and see James. He's our meat lab manager. He's great, and he can set you up with something tasty.
It is very delicious. I have bought from there before.
Awesome.
Well, Phil, thanks for coming in today.
Yes, thank you.
Well, what did you think of that one, Danae?
I thought this conversation was so cool. Anything involving the science of food, I think, is a really interesting topic, but this was definitely more interesting, I guess, maybe than I expected, which is true for almost everything we talk about on this podcast.
So true.
But I would say the thing that stood out to me as super cool is when he was talking about dry-aged beef and how it tastes different depending on where you are in the world. And you guys had talked about wine, which I think is a good comparison, but I was thinking about it in terms of honey, because honey is also different depending on where you are in the world. And I don't know, this concept's just so neat that someone in Africa has beef that tastes completely different than we have here in Idaho. And that's just awesome.
I totally agree. That was possibly my favorite part of the conversation as well. Over the past few years, as a science writer, I've come across so many studies that revolve around the microbiome. And in this case, the microbiome that grows on beef while it's dry aging and causing different tastes. But then we weren't able to study the microbiome terribly well 15, 20 years ago, just because we didn't quite have the tools to look at a really complete picture of what the microbiome looked like. And there are just so many questions that scientists are now asking, whether it's in this case about how our food tastes, or I know we're doing lots of studies on human health, the microbiome that lives in various parts of the human body. We're looking at microbiomes in smoke and how it travels across, the countryside during a wildfire. We're looking at all of these questions that just simply stem from what microbes live here, just across basically all of the world, and all of the questions that you could ask about different ecosystems and different communities. And it's amazing to me how science has opened this door to these whole new set of questions.
No, I completely agree. It's so cool, and I'm so glad that we get to talk to people doing this kind of work.
Okay, thank you all for listening to the Vandal Theory. You can visit our website, uidaho.edu/Vandal Theory, to learn more about all of our research. You can email us at vandaltheory@uidaho.edu with questions. We're on all the podcasting platforms out there, so make sure you go in and rate and review us, and absolutely subscribe. I'm Lee Cooper.
And I'm Danae Lenz.
Thanks for listening.